This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of people with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 516, Drupal CMS and recipes. On today's show, we're talking about Drupal CMS Analytics, recipes, and how to use them both with guest Dharizza Espinach. We'll also cover field data as our module of the week. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Our guest today is Dharizza Espinach. Dharizza is a Drupal developer and educator with a strong focus on content architecture, migrations, and editor experience. She's passionate about helping teams transition smoothly to Drupal and was the analytics track lead for Drupal CMS. Beyond her technical experience, she's committed to fostering inclusive and thoughtful digital experiences. She's also a member of the Drupal community in Costa Rica, where she supports community growth and collaboration. Teresa, welcome to the show and thanks for joining us.
Thank
I'm
you.
I'm John Picozzi, Solutions Architect at EPAM, and today my co-hosts are joining us for the fourth and final time as a guest host, but hopefully not final. Rich Lawson, Associate Director of Technology at Evolving Web. Rich is an Associate Director of Technology at Evolving Web, located in Chicago, where he gets great pizza, I'm sure. He has over 16 years of Drupal experience. Rich, welcome back.
Thanks, John. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, pizza's great.
I was in Chicago earlier this year, and one of my things was I have to get pizza while I'm there. So I tried a couple of different places, and sorry, I'm going to go down this rabbit hole for a second. I now found that you can actually have it delivered to your house. So
Hmm.
I didn't bring anything home for my kids, and I said, "Listen, I'm gonna order Chicago style deep dish pizza and have it delivered, and we're gonna have it for dinner." And now it's, like, in an active rotation in our house. It's like, typically during the winter because you gotta turn on the stove and heat things up, but I'm like, "Chicago style pizza." That's what we do.
Nice. Yeah. Do they like freeze dry it or how do they do that? Out of
Yeah, so
curiosity, I've
it's
never done
it's
that.
frozen, and
Yeah.
then they put it on what do they call it? The icy stuff that they ship
Hmm.
things from.
Dry ice?
Yeah, that one, dry ice, thanks. And then they send it to you in a box, and you just put it in your freezer and take it out when you're ready to use it. It's great.
Nice. Yeah.
Best thing ever. And that voice is our one of our regular hosts, Nick Laughlin, founder at Enlightened Development. Hey, Nick.
Happy to be here.
All right. And now to talk about our module of the week, let's turn it over to not Martin, but Jacob Rockowitz, a Drupal consultant and maintainer of a number of Drupal modules of his own. Jacob, what do you have for us this week?
Hi guys, did you ever need to review all the data in a field on a content type or specific bundle? There's a module for that. The field data module. The namespace is field underscore data. It's a very new module. I created it in February this year. It's in alpha releases. It's got a 1.0 alpha 12 release. It's actively maintained. I'm using it on a project. There's no security coverage because it's alpha, but it's not something you really need to ever really deploy to production. You could just use it on a staging environment. There is test coverage. The module's so simple, there's not a lot of documentation. There's just a README file and an animated GIF on Drupal.org to show the use case of it. It includes just very, very basic default settings to kind of adjust what type of field data is going to be displayed, meaning only published nodes and maybe only field data for the default language, because a lot of sites use automated translation, so you don't really need to review automated translated values. There's no open issues because the module is pretty basic. It's only used on 34 sites, and frankly, I think half of those are my own. The features are it adds a data. So in Drupal core, when you turn on the field UI, you get a field list report. So you go to reports and you go to field list and it lists out all the fields on your site and where they're being used. And you get an additional tab at the end of that called data. When you go over to that, you see all your content types, and I'll even just go my own so I describe it properly, where it lists out all your content entity types and the bundles that you have, and then you can click on each bundle and see what fields are on that specific bundle. And the specific use case I'm using it for is a migration because I need to look at I'm doing a Drupal to Drupal migration. So I have an older version of Drupal, like 8, and we're doing a whole redo and we're just want to look at the data. So it gives you this report where you can go to a content type and say, show me all the fields, show me the number of values in that field so you can find fields that are not being used site-wide. Then go and look at that data, export it as a CSV, and frankly, the export is so someone might clean up the data or do some reporting on the data, but it's a very quick and simple way to just look at field data. I do wanna call out that there's 2 kind of similar modules. There's the schema viewer module, which is a very new module. I actually found it last week, where that just shows all the database tables. I haven't used it, but it just shows all the database tables, and frankly, I find that a little I'm using this specifically for site builders or site owners who just look at field data. They don't need to see the whole schema. And I've recently looked at something called the Entity Export CSV module, which allows you to, like, pick up a node and say, "I wanna export this data," but you don't get a review in Drupal, and it's a little more requires more configuration.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Nick, I'm gonna give a little shout out because 'cause I'm doing this massive migration, so I'm just giving you a thank you for the migration boost module because it literally saved my butt. My migrations had, like, ballooned to this massive performance hit because of a couple of
Yeah.
modules, and that migration boost module allows you to turn off modules during the migration, so literally doubled the performance.
Oh, nice.
It was like 1 or 2 hooks that were consuming most of the resources, and I just turned them off. Anyway, let's talk about this module. I mean, it's what's your guys' opinions? I hope you guys are looking at the animated GIF because that just shows you what it does.
I've probably spent the last 3 minutes looking at the animated GIF just because 'cause I'm I don't know, I'm a fan of animated GIFs, and it very nicely shows me that I can, like, go into data, and then I can click here, and then I can see all the data, the fields where it's used and click through and, like, yeah, I animated GIF for the win, but interesting idea. I mean, I think that, like, this is super helpful because a lot of times, especially when you're doing a migration or like just like content work, right? Like you're trying to figure out what your content architecture needs to be in your, from one site to another. Like now you have the ability to say like, oh, hey, here you go. This field isn't used on all my content types, right? Or this field is used on all my content types. And sometimes, when you're moving from
Yeah.
site to site, that can be an important one because you're like, nobody uses this field. It's legacy. Like, let's get rid of it, right? So I definitely see a lot of use cases there.
I mean, it's great to really, like John said, just audit it. I mean, one thing I'm not sure that this does or should do, maybe it's a separate helper module, but one thing that I always run into when you're running like these migrations are the edge cases, right? I'm working on a big cleanup project for a client as well, where we're kind of trying to de-nest paragraphs as much as possible because we have too many. And I'm running into a couple of issues for a couple where all but like 20, and this has thousands of paragraph entries, right? All but 20 migrate completely cleanly, and finding the 20 that didn't is a little bit painful, right? So, and again, I think it's out of scope for this, but it's a similar kind of space where just like having a tool to quickly and easily audit what is there is extremely powerful because you know you can't build a migration without knowing what you're moving and where, right? And that sometimes takes the most time.
Yeah, I mean, I take it back to, like, when I was doing content modeling and, like, especially for, the last content model I did was for an intranet, and it was, like, legacy Drupal 7 intranet that had been used for, like, 5 to 10 years. So, like, there was a lot of stuff there, and I imagine that this would have made things a lot easier to kind of identify the fields that were used or lightly used or not used at all and kinda how they related and so on, so
There's a
Um,
4th use case I just wanna emphasize, bad data, because I
yeah,
have used it because, like, on the old site, they required a long title. They said, "We gotta have an extra long title," and then they had 20 records, and we opened it up, and we're looking at the 20 records, and they're all useless. People copied the same title over. It didn't really add anything. Something they
yeah,
like you and also hints if it's bad data, maybe it's a bad content architecture, or we're not giving enough direction. They're entering in the wrong value. So it's also
yeah.
good for that.
Is there a good way to get to the content, like, when you're viewing the records and you're kind of getting that at a glance, is there a good way to get into the actual content where you get, like, to the node edit
Yeah,
page?
in the animated GIF, you get to this table view that just it literally is the field data table, so it has the
Mhm,
bundled, deleted entity ID and revision ID. The
mhm.
entity ID is linked. it's blue,
Okay.
in the animated
I
GIF, it's
see, I see.
blue, but I'm not clicking through. So you are
Mhm,
able to be like, why is this bad data here? Where is it going?
mhm.
And go through it.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
trying not to get anything outside of that,
Yeah.
keep it really, because it would be nice. Listen, you could show the entity
Mhm.
ID, but the problem is then you hit a performance thing because you're loading all the entities and looking at
Right.
Yeah.
this is very performant. This is like
Mhm,
you can show 500 records and
mhm.
it doesn't even bat an eyelash.
Yeah, because 'cause you're just loading the table data, right?
Yeah, and the
It's just
CSV is
a
the same thing. It doesn't hit
yeah.
any bottlenecks. I mean, if you hit millions of records, I think you're gonna have to give me a patch to do a batch operation for the CSV export, which we
Yeah.
all hate doing, but yeah,
Yeah, it'd
and
be
Awesome.
but I'm adding little features here and there if I see something off with it, but
And as our listeners know, you are a prolific module maintainer. So I'm assuming there are going to be great things coming for this module.
before we end though, I do need to ask Jake, is this the only module you maintain that doesn't have any submodules?
yes. Oh, no, no, no. All I have a whole bunch of UI enhancement modules that are floating around here and there, and they don't
Oh,
ever because
okay.
it's not ecosystems, but yeah. And
Yeah.
by the way, the description's so basic, this module's kind of done in the sense of like,
Yep.
I don't know if we should be adding more to it other than yeah, it's maybe comparing options, when you have
Yeah.
select lists. You wanna know how often a singular option is used, and that's kinda helpful in an audit, but
Mhm.
Yeah. But you
it's
can
not.
also export the CSV and build a report on that too. Like, you don't need to do
Yeah,
that.
that was the whole point. That's kinda exactly it.
Yeah.
That CSV export I have found
Feel
so useful
feel
in
like there needs
common.
to be an
No,
AI
no, send it.
submodule
Okay.
here
No, no, no.
to send the data to the AI and let the AI help you do that stuff.
Well, cool. Yeah.
But we'll put a pin in that one for
Yeah,
now.
we all talk about AI every day. We're gonna be it.
Jake, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for
Thanks for
having me.
filling in. And if folks wanted to suggest a module a week or connect with you and talk about all the great things you do, how could they go about doing that?
I'm on Slack, Rockwitz everywhere, but Slack is a good way to ping me or in the issue queues. On this
There, y-
module, just use the issue queue.
there you go. All right. Well, I will personally see you in a few days, but
Yep, looking forward to it.
we'll talk again soon.
Hey, take care, everyone.
So there. Right.
All right. Let's talk about Drupal CMS Analytics, and recipes. So, I guess the first question, Teresa, is what led you to be the Drupal CMS Analytics track lead, and like how did you get involved with that? Like, somebody just kind of like randomly showed up on your doorstep and was like, "Hey, we hear you like analytics. Can you help us with this thing?" Like, how does that work out?
Oh, no, it was we were talking, me and Simon, our director of technology at Evolving Web, and he we were discussing about all of these things. I have been, like, trying to get us to do more contributions, and then we were in the DrupalCon, yeah, the DrupalCon next last year. It was in Portland? No, Portland was this year. I just forgot. Pittsburgh, maybe? I don't remember.
Pittsburgh was like 2 years ago. Portland was this past year.
Okay, so the previous year, in 2023, no, 2024, sorry. That year, the DrupalCon, it was announced, the Starshot initiative, and then we all got the stickers and everything, and then we started to discuss, okay, so how can we get involved? I actually submitted proposals for multiple tracks, but the one I got in was analytics. And yeah, basically what we wanted to do was make sure that there is an easy way for the users to users that maybe don't have the technical expertise, or for those who is a little bit more complex, to be able to have everything set up on their sites. So we wanted them to be able to have an easy experience and have some options that were already configured and ready for them. So yeah, it was a little bit of that. We submitted proposal for, I think it was for this one and accessibility, and I think there was another one, but I got this one, so it was great.
So I mean, do you have a background in analytics or a deep love of analytics? Or was it just kinda like, "Hey, we wanna help Drupal and, like, I can be versatile and do multiple things?"
I think usually I can be versatile and try and do multiple things.
Yeah.
In the beginning of when I started working with Drupal, like many years ago, like 10 years ago or something, I started looking into analytics stuff.
Hmm.
But with the time, so it was like my basis. It was the first things that I worked on and first things that I worked with basically. Then things happened, I moved on, I kept doing more of other stuff. And then this time it was like a cool thing to go back to.
Cool.
So what was the major focus then of the analytics track? Were you trying to just get minimal setup, more features? Like what was your main focus?
So basically, it was we did an investigation for it because we were not 100% sure what was going to be like the thing that we had to give more importance to. What was the thing that we had to prioritize? So we did a little bit of investigation on what were the things that were painful for the users and comparing all of it with other competitors, like how do we set up analytics, for example, when we're working with WordPress, and how does that difference feels for the marketers, right? So because of that investigation, we came up with the main issues were how easy it is to install and to configure. Most of the times, marketers or not very technical users are not so sure about what to put where and actually how to install the module. So the idea at the end, the goal was actually make it easy to install and configure and getting everything up and running with the least amount of steps possible.
Okay, so one question that I had is whether or not, Teresa, you ran into any challenges getting everything ready to launch with the 1.0 version of Drupal CMS.
We had a couple of things. So one of those things is that once we decided that we were going to go with Google Analytics because it is the one that has the biggest market share, when we were designing and trying to come up with the recipe, we had this thing that we need a container ID, right? So there were two main issues, let's say, that we had to sort out in terms of the recipe building. One of them was that we need the ID, and the other one was the configuration entity that needs to be saved. So in terms of the container ID, what happened with that is that the module doesn't work if we don't add something, right?
Hmm.
And then there was the question of, okay, what do we do? Do we just install the module and have a basic configuration imported, just the configuration from the module, or something else? Because we need that text. And if we don't ask for that text when we're installing the recipe, well, the main point of the recipe was still not going to be met because then the users will still need to have to know out of like nowhere where to go to add that. So this was the first recipe that actually had the functionality of prompting the users for input during the installation. So
Hmm.
we had there are two recipes that do that. I think currently we only have two. It is the analytics recipe and the other one is the AI. So if you have seen the AI, basically it asks you also for what is the provider and so on, and then you can add
Yeah.
I think the API key. In the case of Google Analytics, when you try to install it, we get a form that asks what is a container ID.
Hmm.
So that was that was challenging because at the moment there was no integration with the project browser, or at least not in the UI. So we had to start and coordinate with the other teams that were working on that, make sure that it was ready to go. And it was an interesting thing for I think for the DrupalCon in Europe in Barcelona last year, we had the first kind of version, but it was like fake working until actually December. So yeah, that one was an interesting challenge. And then the other thing was the configuration entity that it usually had to have a particular name, but normally in Google Tag module, that name matches the Google Tag ID.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And then this is not something that can happen with with recipes when we are importing this. We cannot use that input as part of the name of the configuration
Yeah.
entity.
So
So
the
sorry, John. So
no,
how did you solve that second issue then? Did you modify the GTM module itself to change the configuration or
We ended up just adding a name, a random name to it, and it is always going to be the same because this is a configuration that is coming from Drupal CMS. So the
Mm,
configuration item, the configuration entity is basically called, I think it is just Drupal.yaml file. So it is like a Google tag.settings.drupal.yaml, and that's it. So the ID that we gave to it was
uh,
Drupal, and luckily the module was not really relying on it
yeah.
to load anything else. All the information is inside of the file, so it was good. But at the beginning, we thought that it was and that things might be failing. So it was a little bit of debugging to find out how to actually get it to work to the point that we need it.
And did you must have had to have worked with the recipe initiative to kinda add the functionality to do prompts, right? Or did you kinda just tag on to the AI initiative
No,
needing that already, track needing that?
actually, the first one who got it was, if I'm not wrong, that's what I was told, was the first one that was merged and everything was the analytics one for the
Okay,
prompts. Yeah.
very
So what
cool.
happened there was that Sima, he was
Yep,
working with the 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 work with the prompts. So
yeah.
there was already integration in terms of asking for it from the terminal, but there wasn't for
A
the
UI.
browser.
UI.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Hmm.
And in
that
there, we had to do a couple of fixes, and then we noticed a couple of bugs, and then those things got fixed and so on. It was coordination with that team as well.
Mhm.
that was gonna be my question is like I'm familiar with the prompts at the command line. If, like you said, when you install the AI recipe, it asks you for, your open AI keys and stuff like that. I wrote a blog post on creating a basic donation web form. And there's a recipe out there that does exactly what I say in my blog post. And when you install the recipe, via the command line, it says, "Hey, what's your Stripe, API key?" and asks you a couple of other questions that you have to kind of reply to in order to get it installed. And I'm like, this is cool, like makes sense. But my question was going to be around like those UI elements. So digging into that a little bit more, right? When a user's prompted, right? So is it in the Drupal CMS like installer that they get prompted, like as part of a setup, like a setup step for Drupal CMS?
Yeah. So if it in this case we don't have the analytics one in the main installer, right? It is like you go to project browser and then you install it that way.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, it is not part of the ones that are recommended in the first step. I
Yep.
think in the first step, it is basically a couple of content types. So
Yep.
in the case of analytics, it is not part of that. You have to go to a project browser and then do it that way. When you go to a project browser page to a recipe section or the recommended section, which is
Hmm.
how it is called in Drupal CMS, you click on install for the recipe that you want, in this case, analytics. And then once you click on that button, it takes you to another page that basically has a form.
Ah, okay.
So
So
that's it.
it launches basically the configuration.
Yeah, it's not the whole configurations. It is just a simple form with whatever we had added in the and it works pretty much the same way as the terminal prompt, right? Because the way in which you configure it is pretty much the same. It is still the form API. You still add your text. Sometimes people say that it is like kind of duplicating. It not really, but it is basically following the same steps. So it is a form built with form API for it.
Mhm.
So I'm wondering, like, focusing more in on, leading kind of a track for Drupal CMS, right? You're a Drupal trainer, you're a back end developer. I'm wondering, like, what's it like leading a track for like a major piece of Drupal CMS? I mean, like everybody uses and needs analytics, right? So like it not being there wasn't kind of like an option. You know, What was it like? What was your experience with it? Like, I imagine it was, you know, to get things into the 1.0 version were a little was a little nerve-wracking, but I'm interested in hearing more about what it was like.
Yeah, it was an interesting experience, to be honest. I think there are things I could have done better as a lead, but it was an interesting thing having to coordinate with the team that was helping me out with investigation, for example, and then also with the Starship Council and the product owner like Pamela. It was great working with her and then being able to I create the proposal, then come up with the updates, and then be working on the things. It was a lot an interesting experience. I think in the case of analytics, we mostly had people like other people involved in the investigation part of it. And then when we were actually building the recipe, it was mostly me and the Drupal CMS team, like the
So
leadership team.
so were you leading the initiative and also doing the development work, or were you working with a
Yeah.
bunch of different developers?
No, in this case, I worked with there was one other developer at the beginning that also works at Only Web, Oleg. And then I took it out from there.
Got it. Okay. So you were kind of
Sorry,
pulling
sorry.
pulling double duty, you know.
So one of the questions that I have that I don't think I've asked the other initiative leads, and I'd like to kind of gauge how much work went into this. Like, if you had to guess, I mean, CMS has been out for 8 months now. I think it took 8 months, so it's been about the same length since CMS came out as before. If you had to estimate the amount of time you spent on this in the last year and a half ish, how much time is that? Is it 100 hours, 500 hours, 1,000 hours? How much work would you say you put into this?
No, I think in this one it was how much could it have been? Like maybe like 100 hours in prep. Yeah, like before launching, maybe that in terms of coordinating, doing investigation, or helping with investigation proposals, and then a little bit of the coding that I was getting involved in as well. So yeah, maybe around 100. I don't
Okay.
think this recipe is actually quite at the end, it resulted on a very small recipe, so
Yeah.
it was a short.
Just out of
Uh,
curiosity, and you can choose not to answer this question if you like. How many of those like 100 hours were, I don't know, subsidized, or let's put it this way.
Sponsored.
How many of those hours were like on the clock working for Evolving Web versus like your personal time?
Oh, what a great question. Maybe ooh, I don't know if it was
And you can be
in
like
that
general, like
time.
50-50, 75
Yeah,
25. Like
I'm
I
thinking yeah, I'm leaning towards 50-50 or 75-25, 75 of volume web, but I think it is like a little bit more than 50-50, a little bit less than
Yeah,
75-25.
we'll go 60
Yeah,
40.
it
That
does.
you know, that's fine.
Exactly.
I mean,
Eh,
the point in my question here isn't like, "Hey, look at the personal time versus the time Evolving Web is allowing you to work," right? It's more that it was a team effort, right? There was,
Yeah,
there was impetus from the company that you work for, as well as your own desire to help that kind of brought this to the finish line.
yeah,
and
yeah.
I and this is gonna sound a little bit harder hitting than it's intended and than we generally get, but this question is for you, Rich. When you're considering, because obviously this was, you know, part of evolving web strategy, but when you're considering these kinds of things, how how do you kind of plan out that investment or sponsorship from an evolving, I mean, maybe it's not a strict sponsorship, but when you're kind of planning this out and looking for ways to get involved, how did you how did you kinda gauge it or plan it? Like, did you expect it to be 70 hours of sponsored time-ish? Did you expect it to be 200? Did you say like, "Hey, we don't know, but whatever it is, we're willing to step up"? You know,
I
how
would
does Evolving Web think about this?
So before you answer with actual facts, Rich, I just imagine in my head, and like when I asked my first question about like how did you get involved, I just imagine like Alex running into a room like Kramer into Jerry's apartment going, "We need to be involved in this." Like, that's kind of the way I imagine you guys getting involved. Okay, Rich, tell me how I'm completely wrong and the actual facts.
Yep. So, I joined Evolving Web about a year ago, and so I wasn't directly involved with this one. But that scenario that you painted, John, that might have been exactly the way that it went with Alex. I'm not sure. But, overall, what we do is we would be estimating things and just kind of taking a look at, like how much time we think it's going to take, and then realizing that, like with these twists and turns, like what Teresa had brought up before about like the fact that like there was that UI element that hadn't been built, and there's just things that end up being unanticipated as you're getting into it, that it'll be flexible a little bit in terms of, like what the actual number of hours would be.
Oh, go
Sorry.
ahead. No, go ahead.
We had more people from the team working on it. So as I mentioned, like there were some people helping out with investigation. There was another dev that was dealing with these and doing development at the beginning. So it was a little bit of everything. I I think a lot of it was also we discussing with Suzanne at some point, and yes, so we had been trying to get more contributions out of the door. And
Yeah.
then when this opportunity came out, it was like, "Hey, guys, this is happening. This is happening.
Yeah.
We can help."
And is it more like a downtime or like a off project sort of commitment where you're like, "Oh, I don't have a project to work on right now. Let me go work on this." Or is it like literally planned as like, "Yep, this is gonna be like part of your project workload for the next 2 months?"
I think it was more like the second option that you said.
Mhm.
Yeah, okay. So
So at
it's
some
in
point we
addition
added like
to.
a little uh-huh, uh-huh.
Yeah,
So
got
we
you.
tried to get me out of some other stuff to be able to take this one on, but it was
Okay.
yeah, anyway.
I
Right.
it
Huh.
and we didn't have this in the show notes, so I apologize for blindsiding you a little bit with these kinds of questions, but it's something that it's been at the forefront of my mind is like how different organizations or organizations of different sizes kind of plan out their contribution and put that back in because
Well, I
I
think,
imagine it's very sorry, because I imagine it's very different for an organization of your size than an organization of my size, which is just me, right? I kind of just pick and choose what I want to work on and spend whatever I can on it. But yeah, I was curious about that. I
I
appreciate
mean,
the
I
answer.
I guess for me, it was more of it was more to highlight the fact that Evolving Web, right, and a lot of other agencies of the same size, right, spend their, think about this stuff, and they devote a lot of their workable hours to helping with these initiatives and pushing them over the finish line, right? And I think there are a couple of different schools of thought here. One is, hey, and I'm talking in general, not specifically about Evolving Web or any other company, but like, I think there's a school of thought here that's like, well, open source contribution should happen like as a pet project in your own personal time, right? Not on the company dime. Or, if we're doing it, we should do it as part of a paid project where we're not potentially losing money. And, I think it's notable and noble to point out the fact that no, this is core to what you guys do, and you feel it's important to give this time and energy back to the project. So like
Yep.
we're gonna build it in as an actual project,
Yep.
as not, hey, you have to work extra time to do this, but like, hey, it's part of your commitment.
Well, there's another aspect to it, which is that it shows kind of the barrier to entry sometimes to contributing to an effort like this, right? Building a Google Analytics recipe is like if you had asked, like that's I don't know, maximum 8-hour project, like, and honestly, it probably would be, like, 2 hours, you'd realize, "Oh, we can't do the token, we're just gonna have to add that afterwards." So, the recipe just becomes it enables the module, does some stuff, and then you go to the form, fill it in, export that config, you call it a day, right? But you're solving, part of the track and part of the beauty of CMS, aside from a lot of other stuff we covered in the show before, is You're you're solving the hard UI problem, which is how do we make it easy for somebody who doesn't know what they're doing, doesn't know Drupal, doesn't know config management, doesn't know any of that stuff. How do we make it easy for them to just click a button, get prompted for something that they need, maybe, and then put that in and have it working. Period. Done. And those UI things are things that make a project like Drupal or Drupal CMS or whatever look good, but they require, I mean, 100 hours for that type of thing is an enormous investment. I mean, that's so much work, right? And I mean, I think it's a great contribution. I mean, it but it's a big barrier to entry. But it's the kind of things that are getting solved because people are excited about Drupal CMS, which excites me.
I think a lot of the time that we use for this was in the in the early stages, right? Like all the investigation, because were also thinking about what is the tool that we want to ship this with, because maybe it was kind of obvious for all of us, or maybe we had the hypothesis of, oh, it's going to be Google Analytics, and we're going to go with that. But we actually need to have the data that supports that. Yeah, that is what all people is expecting to use, and so on. So yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
That's a lot of things there.
Yeah, and Teresa, I also remember us talking a little bit about like the sensible defaults that like the configuration that comes in with it. So I would imagine that there were a lot of conversations surrounding like what should those be? Because, like different things will work for different, projects. And so you want to be smart about it so that it does make it really easy for the user when when they're spinning up Drupal CMS and getting things going. But at the same time, like you don't want to, have too much there to where, like they get kind of bogged down and maybe it's overly, complex.
Yeah, yeah, that's also something. Like we were thinking about what are, apart from requesting the Google Tag ID, what are the defaults that we should have for the user? Like the classic one is excluding administration pages from being tracked, right? But then we also had to do integration with the privacy track. So how do we work with that? How do we integrate with them? We need the privacy track to be done with certain things so that we can actually also add extra configuration to configure Claro to include the Google Analytics as part of the things that we are requesting consent for. Sorry. So yeah, the defaults, the integration with the other track, the investigation, it's adding up. And then we actually wanted to do more things, but those certain things had to be blocked at certain points because some other parts were not ready. Like something that we would have loved to do was some integration with Experience Builder for campaigns, but I mean, it cannot happen. It couldn't
Oh, that's
happen at the
interesting.
point.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like, yeah, something that we have to think about and
So
consider there.
so you mentioned in the end that the recipe itself ended up being pretty simple, aside from all the planning and, the custom integration with the recipe installer and all that kind of stuff. What is the actual recipe? What else? You mentioned that there's the excluding the admin pages and stuff, but what's the total inclusion for the recipe? What can somebody expect?
So you can expect to have the Google Tag module enabled. You will be request it will request the Google Tag ID either whether you install it from a terminal or from the UI. You will have administration pages exclusions on like from being tracked. So those default settings are going to be there. And then we also have the integration with the privacy track. So as soon as you install the recipe, you will also get changes in the way the consent is managed for Google Analytics. So what will happen is that normally when you just install Drupal CMS, the privacy track is basically adding a link in the footer of the main page, for example, where you can manage your settings for consent
Mm.
management. The moment we install the analytics track, the way in which that is displayed changes. First, because now we'll also have the analytics categories in there. That includes Google Analytics and Google Tag Manager. And second, it goes from being just a link in a footer to also being a dialog that is displayed. So nothing is tracked until you have given your consent for the system to track your data.
Okay.
So it's those little pieces. It's still, again, a small recipe so far, but those are the
Yeah.
things that it includes.
So you had talked a little bit about, obviously there was the AI track in terms of the UI. You talked a little bit about the privacy track in terms of the consent management. But can you talk a little bit maybe more in detail about like any sorts of dependencies or collaboration, with those groups as you were building out the analytics recipe?
Yeah, sure. So I think with the privacy track, we discussed with Jorgen, who was the lead, is the lead for that one, about what was needed and how to deal with that. So there was integration with them and communication and coordination with them. For the project browser as well, we for that one it was mostly with FinApproximate that we discussed. There were all our dependencies on, for example, the Drupal CMS page recipe, and that's basically. Oh no, wait a minute. Drupal CMS page? Not really. I'm confused in terms. That one is a dependency of the privacy. But I think those were the main integration points, like talking with the recipes team, talking with project browser, talking with privacy. Those
Okay.
were the main items. And in terms of dependencies of with all our systems, I think not really. We basically have the dependency on Google Tag. That's the module that we decided to use. And yeah, I mean Claro, but because of the dependency on the privacy track.
Hmm. Yeah. Thank you.
So one of the things I think like is the main objective of Drupal CMS is that like it expands the adoption for Drupal, right? It makes it easier for folks that aren't overly technical to spin up Drupal, quickly get started with it. Sounds like with analytics, you thought of that with, prompting people to enter their Google Tag ID to make it easier for that setup. I'm wondering though, when you look back at kind of the wider community of developers and agencies that use Drupal, like is there a benefit to the analytics recipe for them other than just kind of like easily installing Google Analytics?
Do you mean for like outside of Drupal CMS or?
Yeah, yeah, outside of Drupal CMS, definitely.
Okay, so it's still like we can still install these or any of the recipes actually, even if you're not using Drupal CMS. So that's the creation of those recipes is still something that can be taken advantage of, right? And this
Mm,
doesn't is not just for the analytics. Again, it's for all of the ones that we have out there. In the case specific of Google Analytics, again, given it is very simple, if you are very familiar with with how to install and configure modules, then probably it's not that big of a deal because
mhm,
this one is basically just gotten like reducing the gap or the entry barrier for people that doesn't have the technical knowledge and needs to have analytics on their websites.
mhm.
So that that will be how I see the difference there.
So I but I think there's another thing. I think there's another piece of value there that you're forgetting, which is yes, it's even as an advanced developer, it's easy to install that module. It's easy to configure. It's easier to set up, right? It's like it's literally 5 minutes,
Yeah,
including the composer require. But
with
it's
this one
also
could be
the
1 minute.
yeah, yeah. Well, no, what I was gonna say is it's also one of the ones that you have to have on checklist because I regularly forget to do until halfway through the project or right the week before launch. Or if you have
Yeah,
it as part of like a recipe and installer, well, it's just a prompt is there, it's done. Like you check a box and it's easy. Now,
Mm.
again, like I said, I think the really brilliant thing that you guys did was that UI prompt, right? That makes it that's a huge that's a huge amount of the work on the UX side, but it also makes it that much more simple. And I think there's a value in just having that kind of thing. Like, okay, I can set it up and forget about it. I don't have to remember. I can check that off my list. I don't have to remember the week before. Like, oh my god, what's the analytics? And yeah, I mean, I have checklists. It's rare now that I forget to do that, but it is still something I have to
Well,
remember.
I think you highlight a very salient point there, Nick, as far as like if you include this in a larger recipe, right? that's specific
Yeah.
to your agency or it's specific to your the way you like to configure Drupal, right? It just makes it makes things a lot easier for you. I also think that, for basic developers, that sounds reductive, but for somebody who's maybe new to developing or somebody who's like, not 100% sure how analytics should be configured. Like they can install this recipe and look at it and go, oh, all right, they did that, they did this. But also for more senior folks, it might be a catalyst to create other analytics recipes, right? So, like if you integrate with Adobe Analytics or you integrate with your own personal like analytics package or something like that, now you can create, a recipe or at least have a template on how to create a recipe to do that. So, yeah, I can see definitely a bunch of different use cases here outside of the ones that you defined. I mean, I think the inclusion in an agency specific like master recipe is or well, in the future it will be called a site template, but I think that's interesting. Definitely.
Yeah, and
So,
I think
oh,
that part is like I'm so sorry.
no, no,
That's all
go ahead.
right.
We want to hear you. We don't want to hear me. Like
Yeah, we
it's
talked too much.
yeah.
So keep going.
No, I was going to say that I think that part is quite good in general about the whole recipes initiative
Yeah.
because and this is something that we're trying to we're trying to do in evolving web. We're trying to come up with recipes that actually will make a lot of all the things that we have to do faster and easier, and that we are not going to forget. Maybe there are some things I'm thinking right now about security kit, for example. There's a lot of settings there that I know it's easy to go and configure, it, but you still have to go and configure each of them, right? To pass some stuff. Or maybe things related to security policies for passwords and so on. Maybe you want to always have certain modules in all of the websites that you're building as an agency. And make sure that the maintenance cost of your sites is lower, let's say, or it's better because you have something that is kind of standard. So being able to have these master recipes or individual recipes that you can add and select on each of your sites is very useful for that.
So, do you intend to post those recipes to Drupal.org as public, or do you think they're just going to stay internal to Evolving Web because they're just like they're specific to your organization?
I think I'm gonna go ahead of the guys on that, but I think we want to publish them. Yeah. So I think that's what's going to happen. They will be public, sorry. All the recipes potentially will be out. We're in the
Yeah.
process of building them. So yeah.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to mention too is, there's other work like going back to what John had said about the kind of the installation process and using all these recipes. There's a recipe installer kit that, had been put together. There's a project on D.O for that. So yeah, it's definitely something that, we will work out in terms of, contributions and there's other things to work with to where you can kind of get that similar experience to what Drupal CMS is doing but, maybe, from an agency perspective, there's a lot more that you want to include or some different things that you want to include that can be helpful there.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. And I know that Project Browser is working on some sort of version that is like also a recipe browser, right? So that
Yeah.
you have the ability to kind of install your recipes, similarly to how you install modules. And I know that Jim Birch also has a repo of recipes floating out there somewhere. So, you know,
Saplings, I
I
think.
th I th
Yeah.
you might be right, but I think, like, I don't know, I just see exponential growth for, like, the recipe ecosystem going forward, which is exciting. I mean, like I said, I I spent an afternoon installing web forms in Stripe and configuring it and getting the form to work reasonably well the way I wanted it to. And then a recipe came along and did exactly what I needed to do. And it literally took me, 3 minutes. I answered a few questions in my CLI,
Yeah.
tool of choice and like, hey, here you go. Right.
I really think the big thing that recipes need, and it's on the roadmap. I know. I think it's far too. I think it's far too far down the roadmap than it should be. Is we need far, far, far easier ways to build recipes because even simple recipes are just painful. And if you're trying to build a recipe that does anything moderately complex, yes, they don't have to be idempotent, right? But
Mhm.
there's just so much that goes into it, and you have to know config so, so, so well to write them. It's painful. A it takes somebody who's far more advanced to build a recipe than I think is reasonable long term. Like, we need a way to just say, like, "I built this blog. I wanna export everything related to this blog. Yes, maybe it takes too much, but export that to a directory and let it be a recipe." Like, we
I
just
mean,
need that.
I tend to agree with you, Nick, but I mean, I think my biggest issue when I was working with recipes, trying to create a recipe to kind of like, as a site starting point, right? I think my biggest thing was like the configuration, right? Knowing what configuration you did need, what configuration you didn't need, what was actually content versus configuration. So like, yeah, if there's some sort of tool out there that can kind of
Well,
automate or help with
yeah.
selecting that and exporting it, I think like absolutely makes
I mean,
sense.
it gets even more complex because you have, config entity versus simple content, simple config. You have config act. Sometimes you have to use a config action to do something. Sometimes you don't. By default, Drupal puts a hash on every config file that you have to strip out. Like,
Oh.
yeah, and like which folder does it go in? Like, there's just so many little details that you have to take care of. And then if you're changing it, again, so, like, I tried to create a recipe for a client where they have a set of paragraphs, components that they use all the time on every project. It's like, okay, that'd be a great candidate for recipe, right? Save us a bunch of time creating the 25 components that they use or whatever it is. And I went through and I even wrote a bash script that I haven't released anywhere yet that I should, that helped with, like, stripping out the config hash and all that kind of stuff because it's pretty predictable. But did all that, got all that work, got it working, and then realized that I forgot all the managed display and all the displays and, like,
Yeah.
just like and I know Drupal and I know config, and I thought I knew like, there were just so many false starts like that where I basically realized for this particular type of system, it's better to just start from a database like we always did, right? Have a starter database that has most of the stuff you want, with no content in it. Instantiate that database, export the config, delete the things you don't want, tweak what you need, move forward. Reset the site UID, all that kind of stuff, all the standard stuff that you do. But these really complex recipes, because the thing is, you add a new component, you want to do it. Well, now you have to strip out that config hash again, make sure you didn't miss any dependencies. Like, just maintaining that takes so much more effort than I think is reasonable to make it sustainable. But it's a problem that can be solved. I'm so optimistic. I'm not worried. I'm just hoping somebody steps up to do it sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
Yep. So, Deriza, kind of thinking about Drupal CMS overall, and you talked a little bit about the roadmap, but are there things that are on there that are really exciting and that you're looking forward to that you could share with us?
For Drupal CMS?
Mhm.
Okay, so as far as I know, the roadmap for the second version of Drupal CMS is basically having the site templates, having experience builder, and then even more AI capabilities. I am especially interested. Well, I'm interested on the site templates. That's cool, but I'm more excited potentially about the experience builder. Like there's a lot of hype and I have tried it a couple of times, and we have been working on experience builder readiness as in working on our own components to make sure that they are compatible with experience builder and they can work well once experience builder is out, so that we can start using it immediately. So
Mhm.
that's something that I feel is quite quite interesting at this point.
Do you see any future enhancements to the analytics recipe specifically? Like, are you looking at other features or
Matomo?
functionality? You
And
like what?
actually, Matomo is on the roadmap. I have a first version of a recipe for Matomo. It is not public yet. That one I'm working on Okay, it's
What
another tool
what
for
what
tracking
is
analytics.
that? Yeah, I'm out of the analytics game, clearly.
Okay, so Matomo is another tool that we can use for tracking analytics data. There is even a Drupal module for the integration. So yeah, actually, that was one of the options that we considered when we were doing the first investigation about what should we ship the recipe with. And I mean, Google Analytics took 95% of the market. So we went with that one. But then Matomo was in second or third place. I can check my notes, but it was in second or third place. It was a lot smaller, but it is still something out there. And we have an integration with Drupal. So we do want to have that one out there. Currently, what is kind of stopping me is that
Yeah,
we do have like the separate recipe, but I'm still considering how to make it so we can do something similar to what the AI is doing, like ask the user which one is the one that they want to go with, and
uh,
then try to apply one or the other. Because currently they exist as separate recipes. So we have the Google Analytics recipe, and then
yeah,
it will be Matomo recipe. But ideally, there should be in the Drupal CMS, there should be one analytics recipe that can provide multiple things depending on what the user chooses. So in this case, it's kind of complex because this master recipe like will be we cannot call the two recipes in this case because they are separate.
yeah,
So that's what's happening right now. That's why it is not fully moving, no, not fully out there. But
yeah,
that's one of the things, having support for other tools. And the other thing is I'm still interested on getting work done for integration with Experience Builder and being able to change the data layer to make sure that that is configured or pre-configured for the users as well. I'm still not sure how that is going to look like, but it's part of the things that we had in the roadmap.
Sorry, I've gone down the Homo rabbit hole here of figuring out why I should use that over
I mean,
Google
it
Analytics. The
it's for
big takeaway here is like 100% data ownership.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's
So
privacy and data ownership, right?
yeah,
So if you have
got it.
to meet GDPR, HIPAA, or those kind or you care about meet keeping your own data to yourself, Matomo is the way to go. And you can self-host.
Interesting. Okay. All right. That is super, super interesting. I mean, I think that, talking to a track lead and talking about analytics and talking about Drupal CMS. So Drupal CMS 2.0, you should be looking for something about that at DrupalCon Vienna. Is that accurate?
That's a good question. I'm not so sure
I
about
think that's a question
I
for
think it is
Gabber.
yeah.
I
I mean,
will I will redirect that question to him then.
yeah. As far as I know, in theory, there should be a release in September. So that is like what, 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now.
Yep.
So yeah, I assume Vienna will have a nice show about it.
There you go. Well, Teresa, thank you for joining us, and hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Thank you so much for having me.
Do you have questions or feedback? You can reach out to Talking Drupal on the socials with the handle Talking Drupal or by email with show@talkingdrupal.com. You can connect with our hosts and other listeners on Drupal Slack in the Talking Drupal channel.
You can promote your Drupal community event on Talking Drupal. Learn more at talkingdrupal.com/TD promo.
Get the Talking Drupal newsletter to learn more about our guest hosts, show news, upcoming shows, and much more. You can sign up for the newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
And thank you, patrons, for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and choosing the Become a Patron button in the sidebar. All right. Teresa, if folks wanted to get a hold of you to talk about analytics, about recipes, about evolving web, about all the things that you're involved in, how could they go about doing that?
Well, my username is Dharizza almost everywhere. So it's just written weird, but you can find me under Dharizza in Slack, in a Drupal Slack, or in Drupal.org as well.
Perfect. And Rich, again, thanks for joining us for the last 4 weeks. Don't be a
Great
stranger.
pleasure.
Feel free to come back anytime. If folks wanted to get a hold of you, how could they go about doing that?
Thanks, John. I'm RK Lawson in Drupal Slack, active on LinkedIn. Can reach out there, and definitely for Evolving Web, check out evolvingweb.com.
And Nick, what about you?
You can find me pretty much everywhere at Nixvan, Nicxvan.
And I'm John Picozzi. You can find me personally at picozzi.com or on social media and Drupal.org at John Picozzi. And you can find out about EPAM at epam.com.
So if you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking, and I thought a really great tagline for today would be, Drupal Unleashed, since we had the dogs, involved a little bit earlier.
Who let the Drupal
Maybe,
out, maybe?
yeah, who let the Drupal out? That's even better. I
Maybe
like
maybe
that.
I
maybe
love
that's
it.
maybe that's what we go to from now on. We could even, like, sing it, like, "Who let the Drupal out? Who? 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 Who?" We'll workshop that one.
Jo